everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and today we're speaking with Amanda Tuminelli, Chief Legal Officer at DeFi Education Fund, about the latest in crypto policy and what she's expecting to see leading up to the election next week. We start out by recapping some of the lawsuits Amanda has helped file against the SEC through DeFi Education Fund and her testimony at the first congressional hearing on DeFi last month. And then we talk about what's on her radar right now in terms of what the SEC is doing and how she expects the election to impact the state of crypto moving forward. Obviously, a lot of the election discourse is speculation, as we don't know what is going to happen just yet, but there is always still time to call your senators and congresspeople and help them better understand what crypto is and the stance that you would like them to take. I also learned through this conversation with Amanda that DeFi Education Fund and other organizations like Stand With Crypto have tons of free resources you can access to stay up to date with crypto policy and learn how to best talk to your congresspeople who are not yet well-versed in crypto to help them better understand the benefits and value of crypto. Amanda was nominated by Andy Boyan and voted onto the podcast by Nicole D'Avis, Andy Boyan, Defi Beats, Disruption Joe, Meg Lister, and Irina Marinescu. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Amanda. Amanda Tuminelli, I'm so excited to have you on Rehash. As some of our listeners know, my background is actually in law. And so any chance I get, I try to persuade the community to nominate and vote on legal-minded people in the crypto space so that I can, selfishly learn more about it. But I also think a lot of what you are doing and what you have to say is really important and interesting too for people in general who are working in crypto to know. So I'm really excited to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. We have a lot to get to today. I think where I want to start off is let's talk about the lawsuits that you have filed on behalf of DeFi Education Fund against the SEC. Let's just start with the juicy stuff. So the one that I am more aware of, more familiar with is, I believe it was earlier this year in March, you filed DeFi Education Fund in conjunction with Beba, which is an apparel company, had airdropped some Beba tokens to people as a marketing play, right? And the SEC said that these Beba tokens that were airdropped were considered securities. And of course, your stance was that these are not considered securities. So I'm curious to just kind of start from the beginning, what was the SEC's stance on why these free airdrops were considered securities in their mind?
So they actually haven't yet said that they are securities. So this is a special kind of lawsuit called a pre-enforcement challenge, where you actually sue before the SEC has actually said anything or taken an enforcement action of any kind. So Beba has never heard from the SEC before. But what we're saying in that case is if you take what the SEC has said about all the other projects that are out there, all the other enforcement actions they've engaged in, then the logic flows that they would find that this free airdrop of Beba tokens is a securities offering. So the Declaratory Judgment Act, to legal nerd out a little bit, is what allows you to sue in advance and say, I don't have to violate the law before finding out what a court would think about this. I can actually seek a court declaration before I've done the thing that the SEC would say is illegal. So Beba did do a free airdrop of Beba tokens. The token entitles token holders to a discounted exclusive duffel bag, an exclusive line of duffel bags that you can't access without the token, and a discount on a bag once you trade your token in. So they did a free airdrop to unsuspecting users. They selected groups and sent the token out, and they plan for there to be second and third and maybe fourth airdrops, but they've only done one because they're worried that at some point the SEC would take the position that those free airdrops are securities offerings. So they're suing, asking a court to declare that their airdrop was not a securities transaction. And together, the two of us are making the claim that the SEC's pattern of suing people in the industry instead of doing rulemaking is a violation of the law, a violation of what's called the Administrative Procedures Act. And that's a law that says that an agency should do notice and comment before they actually enforce a rule against the industry. And because the SEC is clearly enforcing a policy that they have and they've never written it down so that we can challenge it in a courtroom, we're saying that's a violation of the APA. So that is the lawsuit that we filed in March.
Gotcha. And so is what you're preemptively like thinking that the SEC might say is that because the airdrop of BEBA tokens enables recipients to have a discount on a duffel bag or get a free duffel bag or whatever, that's considered some sort of future gain that they're getting from the airdrop. And that's why that would be considered a security in their mind?
So that's definitely part of it. The other part of it is that the BEBA tokens are freely tradable, right? A secondary market could arise. Somebody could create a liquidity pool with BEBA tokens. You don't know. And at the point at which they become traded on the secondary market, the SEC is definitely going to take the position that the token is an investment contract because it enables you to profit, right, from the efforts of BEBA, according to the SEC. It is both. Like in past cases, like in the Justin Sun case and the hydrogen case and the Tomahawk case, the SEC has said that even a free airdrop can be a securities offering when it's accompanied by something like an emoji contest. Like in the hydrogen case, they were giving away hydrogen tokens to people who like told a story via emoji. And then if you did that, you would get tokens. Like that is what unlocked the free airdrop. And the SEC said that that is compensation. Like the participation in an emoji contest was somehow compensating the token creator. So therefore, there was, an exchange of value for the token. And that, according to them, satisfies the Howey prong for investment of money. So it would not be surprising at all if they took a similar position in the BEBA case, which is the basis for BEBA's claim.
Right. And so that seems to be a very loosely drawn, like very liberally drawn line. Where, from your view or DeFi Education Fund's view, like where do you think that line should be drawn in terms of airdrops, like token airdrops being considered securities or not?
So I think if an airdrop is free, like free means free, there's no investment of money, that should not be considered a securities offering. I think if somebody does create a token for the purpose of raising money to start a company and the money is going back to the centralized company that is doing the token release and it looks a lot like a stock offering, then we're in a different world, right? That's a different context. But a free airdrop is not that. There is no money being exchanged at all, let alone going back to like the token creator. So it is definitely fact specific, but I think a lot of airdrops that are for free and there's no connection for money to go back to the token creator, those should not be considered securities offerings.
Right. So how do you expect this preemptive lawsuit with BEBA to shake out? Obviously, like in an ideal world, we hope that the SEC will agree with your position and they'll come around to it. But realistically, based on your past interactions with the SEC, past rulings from the SEC, how do you expect this to shake out?
So we just are in the middle of motion to dismiss briefing right now. So the SEC moved to dismiss the complaint. We just opposed it. We literally filed yesterday. And we're now waiting for them to reply. And then we'll get a court decision on the motion to dismiss. My hope is that that happens in the next 6 months. Litigation takes forever. I know it sounds crazy. But then the most exciting part of this case would be discovery. So if we move beyond the motion to dismiss stage into the discovery phase, we get discovery from the SEC. So we would get internal documents from them that show what their policy is, the way that they think about digital assets, maybe what their internal discussions are among commissioners, among staff about certain projects. And I think that would be really helpful for the industry's understanding of how the SEC sees things. And then obviously, ultimately, we want to win and we want to get a court order that says free airdrops are not securities offerings. That's the win. That would be the W. But we're probably a ways away from the case actually being resolved just because it takes so long for litigation to be resolved.
For sure. Yeah. If you were able to get discovery from the SEC and see some of their internal documents, what would you expect to see? Because I think from an outsider's perspective, we kind of all think that the SEC doesn't really know what they're doing at all. I would almost expect it to just be a jumble of really not very useful information because I don't think they really know what they're doing or what their stance is. Is that what you would expect to see as well? Or do you think that there is more interesting and relevant information that we might find?
I mean, I think you're right that it would be a mess and I think it would be inconsistent and you would see internal deliberations that are inconsistent from one project to another, right? You can imagine their discussion internally when they're talking about the tokens at issue in the exchange cases, like in the Coinbase, Kraken, Binance case, where they're naming tokens and saying these are securities. You can imagine their internal dialogue being something like, well, this token is a security for this reason, but this token is not, like ETH and Bitcoin are not. And you could just imagine it being very inconsistent. So I think we'll see some inconsistency, but I also think we're going to see, and what we allege in our lawsuit is like just a general presumption that if there's a digital asset at issue, then they think it's a security. Like I think they have internally decided that they have authority over crypto because everything's a security to them. And I think we might see that in the documents. That would be the most interesting.
Yeah. So speaking of sort of the internal workings, you also were involved in testifying at the first congressional hearing on DeFi, which took place just last month in September 2024. This hearing was initiated by Congressman French Hill, who's a Republican from Arkansas and chairs the subcommittee on digital assets, financial technology, and inclusion. He is the one that called this hearing. And the goal of this hearing, as stated by Congressman Hill, was to explore emerging topics like tokenization and DeFi and consider how blockchains can be used in finance. Do you feel like this goal was properly achieved from what you heard in the hearing?
I think at least in part. I would say that, like, I know that was the stated goal, but I think like one of the higher level goals was just like, we should have a DeFi hearing to learn what DeFi is. And I think that definitely happened. And there was a good discussion. You know, my co-panelists were amazing, talented, smart people in DeFi. And I think having these voices be heard by members of Congress who are skeptical and friendly, explaining what DeFi is, why it's a benefit, how it can actually make the world a better place. Like, I think those are important things that we all communicated. Of course, there are critics, even in the subcommittee on digital assets, who are skeptical of the promise of DeFi, who are skeptical that it is possible to do DeFi and compliance at the same time. So I think there's more to talk about. And I think that conversation will continue. But I think we've started the conversation. And that's really important. I know a lot of people would say like 5 years ago, they couldn't imagine DeFi being talked about in Congress.
Right.
So I think it is important that it even got talked about and that this is the beginning of what I hope is a better understanding of the technology.
Absolutely. So what would you say were some of the most compelling or well-received points that you made about like, these are the values and benefits of DeFi? Because obviously, like, as you said, you know, the overarching goal of this was really just to learn more about DeFi and like what it is. So you're explaining DeFi to a crowd of people who aren't really familiar with it, don't really have any exposure to crypto or much exposure to crypto. What would you say were some of the most compelling points that were like well received by the audience?
One is that the existing rules don't work for DeFi. I think all of my co-panelists and I made that same point, which is the current system is built to regulate intermediaries. And obviously DeFi is an intermediary-less system. So I think that was a big theme of the hearing that everyone hammered on. Like the current rules do not work for this technology. If you're going to make rules, they need to be new rules that are tailored to the technology. I think Rebecca Rettig, who is at Polygon, is their chief legal officer and global head of policy. I think she was on your show. She made a lot of great points on use cases and how it is possible to create a compliance regime that could both satisfy government worries and concerns, but also preserve the technology. She has a great paper actually talking about this, DeFi as critical infrastructure. And she did a great job of bringing that point home at the hearing and engaged with a couple of different members of Congress about that. And I think Peter Van Valkenburg made great points about how financial privacy is a thing that matters. And there are people on the subcommittee who were receptive to that and some who were not so receptive. But he does such a great point of speaking to why it is important to have privacy preserving technology. And, you know, Coin Center has been very active in that work for a long time. So I think we all brought, you know, different perspectives to the hearing, but all centered around like the net positive of DeFi technology.
You know, one thing that I'm curious about, and I think a lot of people are curious about, especially this year during an election year, is how both sides are interpreting crypto and are responding to crypto. Did you notice any clear divide or patterns between how Republicans received the things that you said or the dialogue that they were having versus like what the Democrats were saying, anything like that?
So yeah, I mean, at the hearing and in general, I say crypto has become increasingly more partisan, and there is a number of more friendly Republicans to crypto than there are Democrats. Now, there are exceptions. Richie Torres, Wiley Nickel are both Democrats on the subcommittee who are very pro-crypto and understand that a lot of the progressive values that they stand for are found in crypto and in DeFi. But generally speaking, Republicans like Chair Hill are friendlier to crypto. And I think we're also seeing that play out in electoral politics. There are a number of Republicans running for office right now who are running on pro-crypto platforms.
So as we are heading into an election year, how do you expect the role of crypto, like how dominant, I guess, of a role will crypto play in the upcoming election, in your opinion?
I mean, I think it's already playing a dominant role. You know, I'm obviously I'm in a little bit of an echo chamber since I work in crypto. So like my whole algorithm on Twitter is crypto focused, but it seems like it's coming up a lot. I also think that it's pretty notable that election races like that crypto is part of the platform, right? Like that's pretty notable. That did not exist 4 years ago. People are, and you know, a lot of that is because of the work of Stand With Crypto and others who have donated to elections to candidates that they like. The fact that it's even being talked about means that it is having an effect, right? We don't know exactly what Vice President Harris and former President Trump think about crypto, but we do know that they each think something because they've at least made some statements on crypto. And obviously Trump has come out as much more pro-crypto than VP Harris so far. But I think it really remains to be seen what their actual policies are going to look like. We don't know yet exactly what they're going to say next year.
Do you have a sense of like what percentage of voters actually care enough about crypto to vote one way or another because of crypto? Like obviously there's like single issue voters on any issue. And for me, it's just hard to know because I'm, you know, like in this echo chamber, in this bubble of crypto, but like in the big scheme of American voters, like what percentage of voters actually care enough about crypto to be swayed one way or another, like in swing states or if they're on the fence, like to be swayed one way or another because of crypto alone?
I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but I do know that Paradigm just released, I think they just released a report on this exact question. So I think that's where you can find it. I just don't know the stats off the top of my head. But I think Paradigm, I think Coinbase, maybe Chainalysis, each have released like different stats on kind of the state of voting on crypto right now.
What are things that people in crypto can do right now? What can we do to help Congress people understand, like say we live in a state with, you know, Democratic Congressperson. How can we help them to understand what crypto is and maybe become more educated about crypto, become more friendly towards crypto and like understand the benefits of it more?
So I think you hit on it. Like, I think you can go talk to the congressperson in your state, either your House rep or your senator. If you are a voter, they are more likely to listen to you, right? So if you know that your representative has never said anything about crypto publicly, it's even more important that you go call their office, write an email and say, like, I'm a voter in your district and I really care about this. And I think that you should also care about this. And if you're afraid to make that call or do that by yourself, my organization will do that with you. So the DeFi Education Fund does outreach to members of Congress all the time. My CEO is meeting with members of Congress all the time. That's like one of the biggest parts of his job. And we'll go with you. So like, if you don't know what to say, if you want to do a meeting, especially if you're an employer and you're in a digital asset related business in a state, that your representative should know that you are driving the economy in your state. You are part of that economy. And we would love to accompany you to go speak to people and make sure that your voice is heard. Other ways to get involved, like you can donate to organizations like mine, like Coin Center, organizations whose work you believe in. There is, of course, the trade associations, Blockchain Association and CCI, which also represent their members' interests in Congress. But yeah, it's like we're really in the crunch zone right now. So I would be reaching out to my rep and telling them that I care about this issue, and I hope that they do too.
What about as an industry at large? What can we do as an industry to maybe, not put such a bad taste in people's mouths about crypto. What do you think needs to change in the industry for builders?
I feel like it's changing a little bit. I feel like the tide is turning. We needed to get away from the, overwhelming FTX, all the other various scams and bankruptcies that happened. But I think we are distant enough from that, I hope, at least I think, that we don't need to be talking about it anymore. And we should be focusing on lifting the voices of builders and developers who are in this space doing really cool, great things that want to build here and want their projects to be able to exist here and not feel like they need to move offshore in order to exist. So as an industry, I think we've been fighting so hard for our survival, and it would be great if we could now actually shine the light on like the real use cases that exist in this industry, the real people who are building. Because I think we kind of all got painted with a broad brush with like bad actors. And now like, let's lift up the voices of the people who are doing really, really good things, which is the majority, right? The majority of this industry are people who are actually trying to create cool new things, and we should be giving them center stage.
Right. So it sounds like the priorities, if our goal is to make regulators more friendly towards crypto, the priorities are, one, probably heightening security practices and, weeding out the scammers. Two, maybe, developing more consumer friendly apps, like more use cases that people can understand easily and relate to. And then three, also like education obviously is always important, getting out and calling your senators, calling your Congress people, any kind of education like that. Would you agree with that?
I definitely agree with that.
We have a question from the audience. This one's from Humpty. He says, how does DeFi Education Fund engage community? For example, do you hold regular spaces to help us learn how to communicate with our congresspersons?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked. So we have just information. We have like a ton of different channels that you can get information about what we're doing and what we're focused on. So if you want to know like what recent legislation is something you should care about, we have a Telegram channel, we have a weekly blog, we have a monthly blog, we post in like the Uniswap DAO forum, the Arbitrum DAO forum. So we are very active like in the community as well. We also are constantly talking to projects one-on-one. So please come talk to us if you have more questions. And we also participate in a policy boot camp. So Polygon and DEF and Solana, I believe Solana Foundation, all participate in the policy boot camp that goes on, I think, once a month. The next one's Thursday, which is why it's top of mind for me. And it is meant for people who are not native to policy to come and learn about how to do policy. So it is often developers and founders who come and spend like 12 hours, not even 12 hours, like maybe 8 hours with us in a conference for one day on like a crash course on policy stuff. So I would definitely say to reach out to us, and we're happy to get you on the list for the next one if you want to learn more about it. But if you just want to know on a more weekly basis, like, hey, what do I care about? Join our Telegram channel where we post, like we don't spam. We just post actual updates. It's called DEF News. It's like at DEF News with 2 S's if you want to join our Telegram channel.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to grab those links from you after this too and include it in the show notes so it's easy for people to click through. That's super helpful to know. And it's really cool that there's all these resources out there. Like I wasn't even aware of these resources, but we need to tell people more that these resources exist because it's really, really useful. So whatever we can do to amplify what you guys are doing, I think is, I'm very, very much aligned with. So zooming out, I'm curious to hear what else is on your radar right now in terms of what the SEC is doing and what we should be paying close attention to?
Politics wise or just in general?
Both. I mean, generally, I don't like to talk too much about politics, but it's an election year, it's top of mind for everybody. So
yeah, I mean, look, I'm super legal focused. So there's a lot of cases that are top of mind for me. So like the US v. Storm case, the Tornado Cash criminal case, is going to trial in December. There's some really interesting things happening right now with the procedure of that case, but I'm sure at least some of the listeners know that the motion to dismiss the indictment was recently denied. And in that ruling, Judge Fela, this is the Southern District of New York, so federal district court in New York, Judge Fela said that her view is that the law that discusses money transmitting businesses and regulates money transmitting businesses does apply, at least on its face, to what Tornado Cash was doing. She's calling Tornado Cash a service and saying that therefore it is a money services business. which I just think is wrong on the tech and wrong on the law. And I'm actually working with Jake Chervinsky and Dan Bearbender at Variant to write a paper on why she's wrong. So that's coming soon. But that's top of mind for me. The same theory is going to be at issue in the Samurai Wallet case. And because these are both criminal cases, obviously the stakes are really high. I think it is a bad day when we are talking about developers losing their liberty based on a novel theory of the law that nobody would have anticipated a few years ago. So that's top of mind for me. Looking ahead to like the lame duck and the beginning of the new year, I think we are absolutely going to see a stablecoin bill revived. We've already seen a few, but we're going to see it revived. And I think we're going to see a market structure bill revived. So this past year, there was FIT 21, there was the DCA, and I don't think those are going to get done during lame duck, but they're certainly going to be talked about during the lame duck. And then I think next Congress, we are definitely going to see movement on that legislation.
A couple follow-ups to that. So with the Tornado Cash, would you mind just giving the high-level TLDR on what you're planning on writing in your paper about why Tornado Cash isn't a money services and how you plan to help Congress people understand this?
So if you were to look at the statute, which I don't know why you would do unless you really cared, but it's 18 USC 1960. It is just very confusingly written. It is not clear. It does not clearly define what it means to be a money transmitter. And what the judge did in Tornado Cash was say that this other statute, the Bank Secrecy Act, the BSA, and its implementing regulations, which do a somewhat clearer job of defining money services business, she says that the two statutes should not be read together. And that's a problem because FinCEN, which put out guidance in 2019, which was very helpful to the industry, FinCEN in that guidance had talked about the BSA and its implementing regulations in a way that put it in the terms that the industry could understand and said, look, if you are an anonymizing software provider, you are not an MSB. If you are an anonymizing services provider, you might be an MSB. But what the guidance did was lay it out, make it really clear and easy to understand who is an MSB and who is not. And by saying that 1960 and the BSA and its implementing regulations should not be used together, should not be looked at together, she was essentially disavowing the FinCEN guidance that came out in 2019. So she's saying to the community, hey, there was really clear guidance that you all relied on in good faith, and I'm just going to not pay attention to that for the purposes of interpreting this criminal statute related to MSBs. So our paper is going to say that that's incorrect. That's not the right way to do the analysis, that the FinCEN guidance was actually helpful and correct in the way that it counseled the industry on how to think about things. So we'll get into the statutory history, real legal nerd stuff. Basically, we'll get into the statutory history and its interpretation, all to essentially say to Congress, please make the law clearer, which is, I think, what this industry has been saying to Congress for at least 5 years, if not longer. Please give us clearer guidance. Please make the law clearer.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to send that to my husband whenever you guys release it, because he's still an attorney and practicing, and he loves he's a litigator and he loves that stuff. So you will have an audience of at least one.
Thanks so much.
The other thing I wanted to ask you and follow up to what you just said is with regards to FIT 21 and how that ended up. Were you just as surprised as everybody else on how that turned out?
Insofar as we got some bipartisan support for it to actually go somewhere, or the actual text itself?
I think that was the more surprise. Well, I guess the bipartisan support was surprising as well.
Bipartisan support was a good thing, right? It is nice to see members on both sides of the aisle being interested in the market structure bill. And that was a House bill. So no matter what, it would have to go to the Senate, and then it might change form, and then we would see what happens with it, which I think maybe we will see happen next Congress. The text was there was a lot of industry feedback and incorporation, and I really appreciate the amount of effort that the people working on the bill in Congress made to incorporate industry feedback. So I feel hopeful that as that conversation continues into next Congress, that industry feedback will be taken into account again, and we will reach a place that hopefully makes sense for the technology and is palatable to both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, absolutely. And then going back to more of so that was the legal side that you're looking you're paying attention to with regards to what the SEC is doing? What about more on like the political side?
It's really hard to say. I mean, we can just engage in speculation. I think it's like going to really depend on who the president ends up being. I think if we have a president who is extremely friendly to crypto, then maybe we will see an SEC and a CFTC that is more friendly to crypto, right? Because the president can appoint a different chair of each agency, and that should, in theory, change how the agency goes about regulating. So I think that that would really help if we had different people in place at all of the various agencies that are relevant to crypto. If we don't have a president who is friendly to crypto, then I think it's going to be more of the same, unfortunately. And that just means that our fight continues. Like, we've sued the SEC in 3 cases, soon to be 4, and we'll keep doing that. You know, like if there's a couple of rules that may get finalized before the end of the year, like the IRS broker rule or the SEC exchange rule, if those get finalized, we will sue over them. So I think it will just unfortunately be more of the same, like adversarial posture if the president is not friendly toward crypto, but it just remains to be seen what it's going to look like.
It's so hard to say. Can you go a little deeper into what those 2 rules that you just mentioned were?
Sure. Yeah. So the SEC proposed an amended exchange rule. So it's called the ATS rule, the Alternative Trading Systems rule, which has existed for a long time. But they proposed an amendment to the ATS rule that would essentially capture DeFi and would make even third-party participants that the SEC would say like assist in running the exchange, like a developer, like they would group everyone together, even third-party participants, like into the definition of an exchange, which would then mean that everyone would have to everyone in that group would have to comply with SEC regulations on exchanges, which is not a small feat, right, to have to comply with all that. So the SEC was very clear in its latest reopening that they intend to capture DeFi, and they have this super broad definition. So my organization and others wrote comment letters saying why that was a bad idea and why the rule as written is unworkable and it's not easy to comply with, if it's even possible to comply with it. And now we're waiting to see if they finalize the rule. There's been rumors that they're going to do that before the end of the year. If they do that, then I think a number of people in the industry will end up suing and saying that the rule is finalized is a violation of the APA, the Administrative Procedures Act, and has, constitutional implications. So that's the SEC rule. The IRS proposed an amended definition of broker for the purpose of figuring out taxes, right? So basically they have changed to broaden the scope of who a broker is, and brokers have reporting requirements to the IRS every year. And they initially proposed this, and it was like unclear how much of the DeFi tech stack they were trying to capture in this definition of broker. And I think something like millions of people wrote comment letters to the IRS about how bad the rule was. So they actually did like a good thing and didn't finalize the part of the rule that related to DeFi and finalized another part of the rule that still amended the definition of broker, but not in a way that's problematic for DeFi. They said we're waiting to finalize the DeFi part of the rule until we've had more time to work through all these comments. But now we're hearing that they may, and this is just a rumor, so we don't know how true it is, but we are hearing that they may also finalize this rule before the end of the year. And we are ready to sue if they do finalize the rule, because we think it is nearly impossible to comply with and would make like brokers out of DeFi developers of self-custody wallets. And it doesn't make sense on its face with the technology. So we would sue and say that rule is a violation of the APA, among other things, if they choose to finalize that rule.
It's so unclear what the regulation is right now, as we've talked about this whole episode. How would you advise, whether it's founders that are thinking about launching a token for their project, or whether it's developers that are trying to build something like a Tornado Cash, for example, anything, how would you advise people to like proceed forward, obviously cautiously, but also like without stunting innovation and growth?
So that's a very hard question. I mean, I think to give you the lawyer answer, like it depends.
Right. I know. I was going to say it depends.
Having a lawyer on your side is always very helpful. And I understand for some, early stage projects, it's just not realistic to hire a full-time GC, but there is now fractional GCs, which means you could have a part-time GC. And I think is worth it, both because you're going to get good advice and also for cover, right? Like you are going to be able to say to a regulator if they come knocking, like, look, we hired a lawyer to deal with all these issues. Like we were doing our best to comply here in the United States. But yeah, I mean, I think the ground is shifting right now. So I would say like sit tight and assess, because if it looks a whole lot better in like 5 or 6 months, then I don't think that, that we don't need to like engage in like massive exodus from the United States. So I would say at this moment, like, let's get through the election and see what things look like. But to the extent that you can get good legal advice now, I would get good legal advice now.
Yeah, that's good advice. Don't take any rash actions before the election happens. Let's just sit tight and wait to see what happens and see how it plays out, which is hard, I know, for people to do. But as you know, we have Hester Peirce coming on the podcast next week or in a couple weeks. And I was just curious, like, what would you be most curious to ask her if you could speak with her? She's, as people probably know, like probably the most friendly towards crypto. That's part of the SEC. And so it's really nice that she's agreed to give us her time and come on the podcast. But what would you want to know as somebody who is like part of the SEC, understands the inner workings, has those inner conversations? What would you be most curious to ask her?
So she is great. And I'm like excited for you. I would be so excited to talk to her one-on-one. I mean, I would ask her what she thinks would happen if there is a new SEC chair that is more friendly to crypto. Like I would ask her what happens to all the exchange cases if there's a chair who's friendlier. Would the SEC ever voluntarily dismiss any of their cases that they are currently pursuing against industry participants? Like, how would the SEC handle that? I mean, I don't know that she'll answer you, but I would ask and say, like, in a perfect world for crypto where we get a really friendly chair going forward, or even like majority commissioners being pro crypto, how could the SEC do better next year? What realistic actions could they take next year that could make it in a friendlier environment for crypto?
Yeah. Do you think that there actually might be drastic changes in the SEC makeup depending on who, like if Trump is elected and everybody thinks he's like so crypto friendly or whatever, do you actually think that he would sort of overturn the SEC and make it like super crypto friendly? Or do you think, it more or less realistically will probably stay the same?
I think there will be personnel changes. I think, Trump has already said he's going to fire Gary Gensler. So I think that that's the vibe. And I think there will be sweeping changes. I don't know. And like to also keep in mind, like crypto is not the only industry that hates the SEC. Like TradFi also hates the SEC right now. They have been terrorizing TradFi with various rules that we just, don't think about as often in crypto. So I think a lot of people would like to see turnover at the SEC and see an SEC that is more pro-business and pro-innovation and pro-capital formation, because they have not been, I don't think anyone thinks the SEC has done a great job of like protecting the market or making investors feel protected when all they're doing is on, like going on an enforcement rampage. So I think there will be changes. I think there will probably even be changes if Harris gets elected. I just don't know that they'll be as pro crypto. I don't know. Unclear.
Yeah. Are you familiar at all with like other countries' laws or regulations, especially like when we look at more crypto friendly countries? What is their version of the SEC? Like, how do they protect consumers while still being more open to innovation and growth in crypto and things like that?
So it's interesting because in other countries, so like we have the SEC and CFTC as two different agencies here. And in other countries, there is not, I mean, this is like painting with a very broad brush when I say this, but other countries don't typically divide like a securities and a commodities future regulator the way that we do. And there's, I think, more like one body that together regulates like the entire spectrum of finance, which I think leads to some more consistent outcomes. But again, I'm like really generalizing. So I guess I'm not in a position to say whether they're doing a better job than us. I will say that Europe has already passed, MiCA, right? Like there already is comprehensive legislation on digital assets, whether you think it's good or bad, it exists. So there's at least a path to compliance in Europe. And other countries have taken some other countries have taken a pro crypto stance that I think is making it a more hospitable place to build. So I'm hopeful that the US next year and in years forward will catch up and decide that we do want to keep businesses here. We do want to keep innovation here. And like the people who are already building here should be allowed to continue and do so in a way that doesn't subject them to criminal and regulatory liability.
I think, whether the regulation is favorable to crypto or not, I think that it's useful just to have the regulation just so people know and know how to proceed forward. If you want to move out of the US and, go to a more crypto friendly country, you can do that. If you want to stick around and, just know, at least how to follow the rules and how to not go to jail.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there any final thoughts you have for people about how they should be thinking about policy, regulation, anything they should be doing in addition to what we've already talked about?
I feel like we covered it. I would just say, if you come up with more questions, if you want to talk more about this stuff, please reach out. That's what the DeFi Education Fund is here for. We are not a trade organization, so we don't have members. We think about the DeFi industry as a whole. We don't represent any one person's interests. We try to represent DeFi as a whole. And we're happy to talk to you. So please come chat with us if you have policy questions, if you want to get more involved. We would welcome that.
All right. And then finally, one word or one phrase going into 2025, how you think the state of crypto is going to shake out in 2025, your best prediction, as we all love to speculate so much in this space. What would you say is that one word or one phrase that describes 2025 as you predicted?
I'm going to take a positive view and I'm going to say optimistic.
Nice. I like it. And then finally, how can people find you, Amanda, if they want to follow you personally? And then also share some links to DeFi Education Fund where people can get more resources.
Sure. Yeah, I'll send you all the links, but I'm on Twitter. I'm on Warpcast. You can go to our website, which is defieducationfund.org. And we welcome support in all of its forms. This work we do is not free. So if you feel so inclined, we would welcome a donation. But I will make sure you have all the links to all the ways to get in touch.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be back again next week with another episode of Rehash. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Rehash. Rehash is hosted and produced by me, Diana Chen, and supported by our community of NFT holders who curate our guest lineup each season. To get involved, head over to our website at rehashweb3.xyz and collect this episode as an NFT. Anyone who collects an episode becomes part of the Rehash community and will be able to nominate guests for future seasons. Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at RehashWeb3 or on Warpcast and Lens at Rehash, and join our community on Telegram at t.me/rehashweb3 to hash it out with fellow listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again next time.